All right. The project I've been working on with Ritika, who's unfortunately not able to be here, is purely a research project. It's been a very, what they might call, short and dirty one. It's only been over, we did the actual field work over about three months. Now, I've been driven by questions like, look, we have statistics, and they're used to, as we say, to convey urban India's lack of adequate sanitation infrastructure. But my question is, what impact does this have on everyday lives of poor women and girls living in the slums and informal settlements? How and what sort of decisions are they forced to make when, say, the community toilets don't meet their needs for cleanliness, privacy, and their safety, or they're completely absent? So this puts the focus on infrastructure. So generally, people tend to regard infrastructures such as sanitation and others as being largely considered to be a technical apparatus that is designed and managed by urban planners, government officials, civil engineers. But infrastructures shape how people relate to each other and the cities in which they live. So such a view has created misconceptions about the nature of infrastructures and the consequent lack of recognition of the political, cultural and social economic assumptions built into them, along with the risks and harms that are created and harms inflicted when they malfunction or are completely absent in the everyday lives of particularly the urban poor, and women and girls even more so, because they are the ones who suffer the greater impacts, shall we argue. So one approach to understanding why this happens is to use this notion of infrastructural violence that seeks to identify that the political economy underlying the socio-spatial production of suffering in contemporary cities. All right. So we said, okay, that one. All right. So there are two types of infrastructural violence. There's this notion of active violence, and we see it, forceful evictions for the building of roads, building of housing, this type of thing. We see it everywhere. There's nothing new in relocating, resettling urban poor populations in any countries around the world. We had it in Australia in the 1880s, early turn of the 20th century. What I'm particularly interested in is this notion of passive infrastructural violence that derives from the limitations and omissions of the infrastructure planning process, particularly in the design and its implementation. So what happens is people living in illegal settlements, they're often excluded from this process. So when you don't have, or you have very inadequate or have a complete lack of sanitation, what does it look like? So it's not providing enough community toilets for the local population, not having regular maintenance and repair for the infrastructure that's there. And when these community toilets and others become unclean and unsafe, women really have no choice but to resort to open defecation. So this project is, we've looked at two localities in Delhi, and the choices were based on the work that's been done by the Cities of Delhi project. So Mangalpur is a resettlement colony, all right, established in 75 during the emergency. Pockets of JJ clusters in it, and it's quite to find the actual population figure is quite difficult. All right, so in the formal part of this resettlement colony, sewer lines were laid over the last 10 to 12 years. For the people living in the JJ clusters, it's using, mobile toilets, and there's been a new toilet block that's been developed. So it's not terribly, it's very hard to get decent maps as well, might I add. This is a more topographical one. So in the two stars represent the functioning toilet blocks. One is only been opened about a month. The other is the mobile toilets, and the rest are showing sort of where we did the surveys. So the other location, Kusanpur Pari, which is in South Delhi. It's a slum, urban village, discussions about what it should be classified as. But it's adjacent to the ridge, and it was also established in 75. And this is the interesting part. These are doing these surveys in long-established colonies was quite important, rather than, there's been a lot of work done on more recent resettlement colonies where people have just been moved where there's been no infrastructures, or very little. The one thing that characterises Kusampari is a lack of water. If you walk around the area, it's ubiquitous blue water cans. People have these wonderful bikes which they take the seats off and they hang so that they can transport the water. So they can transport 2 per bike. The population estimate around 50,000. So DUSIP says there's nearly 5,000 households, and there's only one functioning CTC. There's another one that's apparently being repaired. And this is sort of what it looks like. Google Maps showing a bit of discrimination, don't really document slums in that other areas in particular detail. All right, so we interviewed 31 women, and that was a decision. We were just looking for the experiences of women and girls. So a couple of men we talked to as an informal conversation, but the statistics that I present are from women and young women. All right, so they're 17 to 60s, so it's a very diverse age group. 20 were married, single, 2 will be dead. Most people own their juggy, all right? And you can see more than half of them actually built it themselves, self-construction. Now you'll see there's a high number of households with private toilets. So Mangalpuri, it's because of the fact that we interviewed several women who lived in the resettlement colony proper. So these are the ones, it's about 6 who connected, who live in the resettlement colony proper, and in a couple of the juggy colonies, they've managed to get a sewer connection, which I'll explain. So people have cesspits, they have septic tanks, some of them are emptying into drains, and they've also got this other category of people who are using an uncle's, someone who lives across from them, just nearby. They're using their toilets, often at night. This is what you've got in terms of community toilets. So you've got your mobile toilets, and this is the functioning block in Kusampari. So we've got 11 people using the community toilets, mostly daily basis. People thought that they were, there's even divided whether they're actually clean or not. There's some of the reasons that they're giving for being dirty. Surprisingly, lack of water was not... what happened was we had survey questions, and people were ticking boxes, but a lot of the women were making comments as well. And so we decided that... so Ritika actually wrote these down, because, they were quite interesting reflections, and they sort of fleshed out the answers. And being a smaller survey, we could afford to do this. We also formally went back and interviewed 3 women from Mangalpuri and 3 from Kusampari who we'd previously surveyed. They seem to be interested in the project and have good stories to tell. All right, the rates of open defecation are quite interesting. So you've got 11 people. We've got 15 people on this side who say they've got private toilets. We've got 11 people who are using the community toilets, and we've got 14 people who are also using open defecation, showing you this overlap. So for some people, it was every day, occasionally. Now, look, you see here at night, when the toilet blocks are closed. These are the interesting statistics. So this is the picture of the overlap. So on the left is Mangalpuri. Now you'll see, you've got 9 people who have their own private toilet. Now, there was one lady who was in her early 60s. So she lived in the resettlement colony proper. But she said, look, it's about design. The toilet's been put up on the 2nd floor. I can't get up there all the time. So I just go and pee in the drain. And then the others are the same sort of overlap, that when the community toilets are closed, especially at night, they have to resort to open defecation. Often it's using nearby drains rather than actually going to designated open defecation grounds. The story is perhaps similar in Kasampari, as you can see these overlaps. So people with private toilets, 2 of them are using open defecation, and that some of that has to do with lack of water. You haven't got enough water to flush the thing, so it smells. So people are just using it at night sometimes. Or it's the women who are using it and the men are going for open defecation or using community toilets. So it's a very fluid picture. All right, so what are the harms that come from a lack of sanitation infrastructure? Gender-based violence and harassment, the psychosocial stresses and impacts this has on the well-being of women, and also the economic impacts on individuals and households. Now, as I said, a lot of this, the questions we're asking, and when you're talking about a topic as personal as gender-based violence, what tended to happen was we let women answer questions. Have you suffered from any gender-based violence or harassment, or do you know of any, or has anyone in your family suffered from it? So we get you do get quite a high statistic, which, and then here we go. So we've got 16 women saying that they actually have experienced some type of harassment. So, that doesn't match with figures of the private toilets, etc. But the most common type, was this teasing and whistling that goes on, right? And the incidence of rape, I'm not sure whether several women were talking about the same event. It doesn't seem to have happened. There's assault, women being grabbed, this type of thing. But physical rape, there's a story runs through both places, and it could be people just telling us the same story. But you can see groping, flashing, men taking photos, being followed. This men dressing as women. This happened particularly down in the area, especially they say in the winter when it's foggy, they sit there and put their shawl over there, and they just sit there, and you just glance around, you think, oh, there's just other women here. And women also get sticks thrown. So where's it happening? Well, you can see this in Mangapuri, it's in the community, it's in the mobile toilets around there, whereas Kasampari, less so. Whereas the open defecation site is more prominent in Mangapuri. Walking to the toilet's only happening in Mangapuri. How often? Well, some people are saying it happens every day, and others say it's not often. So, and it's a lot of these questions are also. You've got to think that where we're interviewing people, women were often, they weren't actually private spaces. Ritika just walked through these places and asked people would they participate. It was very random. And often there'd be 3 or 4 women who'd be sitting out outside someone's house, chatting, and you'd ask them. So you'd end up almost interviewing 4 of them. So what we did, we get the statistics and stuff from one person, but often you'd have this bleed through of experiences of others who were with them. Justification for using that, well, they were obviously living side by side. A lot of them were around about the same age group. So I'm taking license here, but saying that perhaps these are similar experiences they're having. So these are a couple of the quotes we garnered. So it's this business of, we've heard stories and stuff. Some of that is probably what's going into our statistics as well. And this is about the frequency of harassment. And so you can see, this is another woman who's lived there for 30 years. So, she's got some way to judge levels of harassment that are happening. And look, I admit all this, gender-based violence is part of a larger social picture. You've got, high levels of particularly unemployed young men, you've got poverty, you've got drugs and alcohol, all playing out. But, we're looking for what's happening, linking it directly to lack of toilets. So these are some of the stresses that women reported. So fears of being bitten, injury, sexual assault, having to go out at night, walking across spaces where men and boys gather, can't report the incidents of violence or harassment, worrying about the safety of your daughters and your own, and the shame of not being asked guests to come and visit because you don't have a toilet. So here's about men dressing up as women to attack girls. See this here. The pressure on women not to report. Another woman said, bringing your report, the police come to your house, creates a bit of shame in you and with your neighbours, etc. And it's often at justice, you get more harassment rather than any resolution. And a lot of these, there's also the element of revenge. Women were saying, well, look, if you report them, they're just likely to come around and bash up my husband, my sons, rather than resolve anything. So this is how, about so-called choices of sanitation, what you do. So here's the fear of violence on the way to the toilet block, is dissuading this woman from using it. So she's going to open defecation most of the time. About mobility, basically because of what's happening, you don't want to go out at night. And this one, no guests come to our house because we have no toilet. It becomes very uncomfortable if they come here and have to use the washroom. They aren't used to using open grounds or public toilets, and we feel ashamed that we have to make them use such facilities. That is why we don't have any guests at our place. So this is a woman living in, I think it was F Block in the JJ cluster. So what are some of the economic harms that women suffer? Well, there's the time lost. So 10 to 15 minutes to walk there, take half an hour or more. By the time you queue up, it's just not worth it. Forest is very close. I can't waste 45 minutes every time I have to pee. Then there's the issue of crowding. There's the cost. I did a very rough estimate for a family of 4, so 2 adults, 2 sons living in Kasampori, where it's 2 rupees a visit. So you do it maybe 2 visits a day for the 4 of them. It's 5 rupees to bath, so maybe they have a bath once a week, and 10 rupees for washing clothes. So washing clothes once a week. You could be looking at 162 rupees for this small family, which monthly is about 650. So, it's quite an expense. It's got a hole in your budget. So, women have to cope with this scenarios. So, these are with the harassment. So, this is some of the activities they. So, it's the going with a group of women during the daytime, going at night. Go early in the morning, that's when everybody goes, so there's a little bit of safety in numbers. And a lot of women are learning how to swear and answering back. But they have to be careful, because I said that there's also that element of revenge. So what are the health impacts? So only a few women felt really that they were suffering some health impacts from it. So it's constipation, loss of dignity, loss of reputation, fear of going alone, urinary tract and gastro are the main. But we only had a couple of questions on this, so it's probably we didn't really tease it out to the extent that's possible. So the coping strategies, you just have to practice bodily control. So this means you have to watch what you eat and how much you drink. Going with a group of women, we're saying after 10 o'clock she's got to take her husband, otherwise find someone else in the neighbourhood to go. It's a lot of effort just to go to the toilet when you think about it. I like this one. We throw stones and sandals at them. I never knew how to swear until I came here. Once I asked my husband to come along because I was scared, and he said, "What will people think? You taking your husband to the train with you?" But he's a good man. He comes with me if I'm really scared. And here's another use for mobile phones. Earlier there were lights in the toilets, but now they've become dysfunctional. Often we have to take our cell phones with us so that we can use the torch light from our phones. This is very uncomfortable since we have to squat, hold our balance, use one hand to wash and the other to hold our phones. Sometimes we make our friends and sisters throw light from outside, in which case you have to leave the door a little ajar. Now, we asked the questions for those that have private toilets. What role do women have in making the decision to build them? Perhaps some of these questions were leading. We don't know. But, what we're saying is having several women in the household did influence their decision. But don't forget, 7 of these households, they were given connections to the sewer as well. And the reasons: make it safe for women, worry about dignity, stop harassment, and because they've got a disabled or elderly woman in the household. So here we built a toilet especially for the children. I was worried someone would abduct them. I was also scared for my own safety. Mother-in-law sanctioned the construction of a private toilet in our home to ensure our safety. So who then is responsible for such harms and social consequences? So I argue there are 2 factors that facilitate gender-based violence and sanitation inequalities in Indian cities. So you've got a lack of political will at all levels of the state to take a systematic approach to the planning, implementation and maintenance of sanitation infrastructures. And 2, a continuing lack of analysis of gender as a process based on unequal power relations in the policies, design and location of community toilet complexes. So generally, sanitation policies, they don't talk about funding the entire sanitation service chain. It's targets for building toilets, which are often not connected to sewers or mains water pipes. So in this case, it's community toilet blocks. The failure of urban local bodies and agencies to take responsibility for the cleaning and maintenance. I mean, crores of rupees are being spent building these toilets, then they just degrade because there is no maintenance regimes. And there's been no real concerted effort to ensure local women's participation in the design, construction and selection of sites for public and community toilets. When you don't have any sort of gender analysis in policy making, so toilets are put in inappropriate locations. We go back to what I was talking about, time lost. If you've got to walk 10, 15 minutes to the toilet block each way plus wait around, it's going to discourage women and girls using them. We're still designing toilets that don't ensure women's privacy and safety and dignity, this type of thing. You put in poor flush with that because you don't have connections to water mains. You're just increasing the workload for women. And women's participation is often a technical solution instead of being a social process that seeks to address the spatial inequalities they experience every day. So why don't households have a toilet in these 2 localities? 6 women answered this question, and they just said, look, it's not a priority for the men in our household. My father's an alcoholic, completely disinterested in the well-being of his family members. As long as he gets his fix, doesn't care about anything else. And there's no space. And this is, these juggies and slums are very, they're cheek by jowl, the lanes between them, very clean and tidy, all that sort of, but 2 people struggle to pass. So where do you build a toilet? One lady built a septic tank in Mangalpuri, and she just happened to be, her juggie was there, and there just happened to be a laneway that went that way, and so there was a space. And she put it just outside her household. But a lot of other people just don't have that option. people who live on the edge or the outer part of these slum colonies, a lot of those people, those households, have built toilets for that reason. They actually have space. All right. So what's wrong with current design? Well, it doesn't satisfy two critical needs, logical needs: menstrual hygiene management, cleanliness, etc. When we ask women questions about menstrual hygiene, and their biggest gripe was there's no bins for sanitary pads in toilets. We have to take them home or just chuck them somewhere, throw them in the bin. It's not rocket science. And look at these two. This is, we're not for women's privacy and dignity. This one on the right is the block in Kasampari. You can see, first of all, the doors are only halfway up. But Ritika just happened to be there, for example, and this is the caretaker on the roof doing repairs. But obviously he can see into the cubicles. I don't know why, and all the toilet blocks have this big space in the middle. I don't know whether it's for air and whatever, but we've got another place. You've got houses that have been built nearby of 3 or 4 story. Well, if they're so inclined, they can look in. And then you look at this is the mobile toilets on the left. Would you want to use these? Look at them. Look at the stairs. I mean, they just. And so, is it any wonder that, especially elderly and disabled women, are terrified? They just don't go there. They say, look, I can't climb up that. I've got to hold water. I've got to hold a stick to keep me going. One lady was saying, look, I go in and my stick falls in the hole every time. So I just use it, and I go to the open defecation site. Sheer practicality. So we asked the women if they had if they were consulted, what would they like to see in a new toilet block? And this has, because there is a new toilet block which none of the women talked about being built, and it's only been opened in the last month in Mangalapuri, and no one actually made comment to us that they're building a new one down the road. So look, doors that close and have locks. Separate block for women and girls, more lighting, bins for napkins. Consult women, hire toilets, Western style for the elderly and disabled. Adequate water facilities to stop competition among users. And entrances to both blocks should be at opposite ends. Because when you queue up, that's when a lot of the harassment takes place, because the queues are side by side. So I think some of the conclusions from this study, I think it's probably raised more questions than it's answered, but anyway. So passive infrastructural violence often means women have no choice but to resort to open defecation. Households will build toilets if they have money and space. Gender-based violence means many women and girls experience fear every day when using community toilets or OD sites. So women have developed many personal coping strategies to mitigate violence, but they have a long-term impact on their health and well-being. So what would I suggest if I was playing God? You've got to have a maintenance regime. Local authorities have got to establish a maintenance regime before they even build new toilets. I think making them multi-use. We've seen in Mumbai with some of the stuff that's been involved. If you put more people in a space that have other activities, with classes, you've got people coming and going. It tends to deter young men, particularly hanging around. I think they've got to be open 24 hours a day if you really want to stop open defecation in these areas, because it's one of the main reasons. I think there needs to be more than one caretaker per toilet block, because you've got the safety to keep people away. I mean, there's one of the caretakers, lady mentioned, tries to keep the ETs away, but there's also the theft of taps and locks and stuff in the toilets themselves. Needs more lighting as you go to and from. Water supply. And I think loans and funding directly to women. No one talked about Swachh Bharat. Oh, well, no, look, I think one lady mentioned that, look, they're giving money to people in rural areas to build toilets. Why can't they do it for us? That's about the only time it was mentioned. We didn't ask the question, but that's the only time it was mentioned. So, but given the level of how many women have been involved in decisions around building toilets, one woman said, look, we've got the money, and she runs a shop in Kosampari, but my husband, he's not interested. I mean, he works as a peon. We have the money available. Another woman said, look, my husband and I, we decided we'd do it. We had saved up the money, and then my daughter's got ill, and she's got some undiagnosed illness, so they just lost all their savings. So the intent is there, if possible. For those who can't, you've got to fix up the community toilets if you want to stop open defecation and to stop these incidents of harassment, violence, etc. that comes from this passive infrastructural violence.
Thank you, Susan. We'll take about 3 quick clarificatory questions if there are any, and then there's a tea break, which we'll miss if there are too many questions, and then we'll get on to Renu's presentation after the tea break. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I was wondering if you mean to include girls when you say women?
Yeah, we have one adolescent, 17, 18-year-old, and she was interviewed with, I think, her mother at the time. And there was another 20, 21-year-old.
Because their problems are a little different. I know. Some of this is completely same, but firstly, I must congratulate you on this study. Excellent. It's very much what the reality is. And the second thing is the health part. I feel that there is some gaps in those because we find much more problems related to that, including reproductive tract infections. Okay.
Very interesting study. I just have a question regarding, because your study shows that women play a significant role in determining whether a toilet is built in the household. Did you find any difference in the intrafamilial usage of the toilet? Do women use it more than the men of the family?
Yes.
Secondly, also, did you probe about the unpaid work burden of women increasing with the construction of the private toilet?
You mentioned effective maintenance regimes. Are there good examples of those in India? That's it.
Actually, I was wondering that you have talked about all the problems, but I was just thinking that behavior, is there any evidence you have found that all the facilities are available over there, but still, because of the behavior choices, they are not availing the community toilets, like as we have found it out in the earlier discussions? Like because of behavior choices, they are not comfortable using community toilet, and they are more comfortable going for open defecation.
Right. Yeah. I've forgotten now what the role of women in decision making. What was it? We didn't look at the extra work, but that wasn't part of the questions we asked. I mean, we tried to keep the interview under an hour, and we gathered all that basic data and stuff. And I mean, there's just a limit to what you can include in it. What else do we? The maintenance, I believe, this is part of in Calcutta and perhaps in southern India, there seems to be examples of better regimes. I was looking at some work on homeless people and people living on pavements in Calcutta, and they're saying in the central part of the city, and everybody uses the community toilets because they are well maintained. About the choices, some of that's driven by economics. I mean, it's the community toilets, they're dirty, they're crowded, and they don't use them for that, but it's economics. I mean, A, it's the time, how long it takes, as I said, and B, it's the cost. So the rest, no one else mentioned any other factors, but look, we didn't go looking for them. I didn't want to touch caste and culture and that sort of stuff. I was looking at this being made every day, and what are some of the harms and how are they?